Hi everyone, I'm Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn. Welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? If you have your video on today, you see that we have a special guest with us here today. We have Lisa Cheng Smith, founder of Yunhai Shop in Brooklyn. What's up?
Hey,
Thanks for joining us.
of course. It's fun to be here.
So, we are really excited to talk to you about many different things today. But before we get into any of that, we want to give you a chance to introduce yourself because not everyone knows who you are or what Yunhai is. So, we'd like to ask you to give a little intro and also wrap in the question we always ask our guests, but where are you really from?
Cool. So, yeah, my name's Lisa. I founded Yunhai actually in 2018. We import Taiwanese food. So, like artisanal Taiwanese food from Taiwan. I think it's, pretty tied to the question, where am I really from? I think that, some people feel like that question can be a hard one. For me, growing up, I heard that quite a bit because I'm half as well, which creates even more like curiosity or confusion. So hearing it almost from both sides, like the Asian side and the maybe more American or Caucasian side. And I think that, for me, like I actually never got really triggered by that question because it was something I was always trying to figure out as well. I would say that like Yunhai is kind of my answer to that question in some ways, where it's my like exploration of that question, like where am I really from? So my mom's from Taiwan. My dad's American, like white guy, and just trying to like navigate that kind of mixed heritage has brought me both really outside of Taiwanese culture and also at the same time really inside it, but as an outsider. To just kind of wrap up the answer, I think like the Yunhai project is really about translating Taiwanese culture for people who are not within it and also exploring what it means to belong to a culture when maybe language is not a pathway in. Food might be, even for people who have like a lot of our customers are like, oh, I lived in Taiwan for so long. I loved it. That's another way of belonging to Taiwan as well. So long-winded answer. I don't know if I did a good job introducing myself, but to answer that where you're really from question, I think it's actually like quite pertinent and like a really important question for the Yunhai project and my own kind of identity within that.
I love that. We talk about it all the time, the fact that food is so universal. Like it's such a tying together factor no matter which culture you come from. So I really love using food as the vehicle to bring many different types of people together, and creating that sense of belonging is really nice. I guess for me, one of my biggest questions is like, logistically, how did you manage to make all this happen? Because when I look at like your Instagram or follow your newsletter, I'm like, all these things are like artisanal or like small farm batch things. And like you've talked about yourself as an outsider, but I feel like you have to be quite inside Taiwanese society culture to even be connected to like all these little known families that are creating all these products for your shop, right? So like, how did all that come together and how did you make those connections?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really long answer because there's so many people that have been instrumental to that. When I started Yunhai, I was like, oh, I don't even have a single Taiwanese friend, really. I mean, I knew Taiwanese people, or I knew people that I was friends with might be Taiwanese. We didn't like explore that because I don't want to be like, yo, where are you actually from? Are you Taiwanese? Like when I run a Taiwanese shop, it's more appropriate to be like, oh, like, is your mom from Taiwan? Let's talk shop. But it's not something that you just want to like ask your friends straight up because they're like Asian. So to start with, I was very much an outsider. So that's just my way of saying that. It's like I didn't have a big Taiwanese community at all. And just kind of over time, like built that up. But a few people were very instrumental. So I was previously working as like a design director at a product forward company, like selling lifestyle goods. And we made some products in Taiwan. So I would travel to Taiwan and pick up products that I wanted or saw and would bring back like suitcases, like very typical. But I also met one of my partners there. So his name is Ivan. He's not like technically a partner in the US business, but he runs Yunhai Taiwan. He's actually like a, Taiwanese factory owner, not my parents' generation, but between me and my parents. And he's almost like a fairy godfather type. He was like leading New Balance, the New Balance shoe factory in Taiwan for a while, and was making like, suction cups for IKEA and like doing all of this kind of like big client work. And he was making some stuff for us. I was at this company called Areaware, and we kind of got along. And he's like, "Where do you want to eat? Like, go to the hotel." And I'm like, "No, we got to eat like street food." And so then we went and got like milkfish belly, basically. And I just kind of told him, I was like, one day I really want to export like the fine, like craft artisanal foods from Taiwan. I want to export them to the US. And he's like, "Oh, I'll help you do that one day." That's basically what happened. So that's kind of the inside connect, where we do have a warehouse in Taiwan. And we do have like a purchasing agent in Taiwan, because farmers cannot export easily on their own. They're potentially not really interested in that because they have a local business to look after. So we kind of operate, sorry, this is my cat Arthur here. Yeah, there you go. We kind of operate as, his claws are very sharp. We operate as like a local customer, actually, where we just order and then we put it into our warehouse and then consolidate it and ship it out. So that's the inside bit. And that's very much due to Ivan and his team. So Feng is our purchasing manager. A couple years later, I also joined forces with Lillian Lin, who is my business partner on the US side. And she has a background in sourcing, product development, hospitality. And we kind of joined forces to develop a dried fruit line. She's also, grew up in Taiwan and can like operate with a lot of facility between both cultures, actually, especially with respect to business. And so she does a lot of the procurement and product development and operations now. So that's the second layer of how we can make it happen. But initially it was, me and Ivan, and sometimes we would just airship stuff, and then we started ocean shipping it. I have a retail background, so I kind of know how to make an e-com site and do the fulfillment. And then we eventually opened a store, and just step by step, really.
Wow. You make it sound so easy. It's like step by step, and now there's a store and like a full thing. That's awesome.
It's definitely a little bit too much work, but, so we're always looking for ways to simplify. And that's the kind of disadvantage of step by step. Is like, okay, did we like take too many steps? I don't know. But yeah, it's going well.
How do you decide what goes in the store? Is it something that's like tugs at your heart? Is something that's nostalgic? Or is it like a combination of that and just business decision on what sells well at the store?
Yeah. So maybe like to back up, I think like one thing that a lot of people don't know is that the store is actually just one part of what we do. So we're really a distributor. And so what we really do is we import products from brands or like producers in Taiwan, and then we sell those. So we sell those like through many channels. So one is the store, another is e-com, another is wholesale. We sell to restaurants. So we have quite a few different business channels. The store, like the brick and mortar store, is actually like the smallest channel. So I always talk about the store as being like the heart and soul of Yunghai, but like the body is like much bigger and ranges much further. But in the store, so we kind of sell a couple different things. So we have like our exclusive collection, which is like the soy sauce and the dried fruit and the stuff that like only we sell. And that's what we import ourselves. So that's the number one products mix that matters to us. In the physical store, we sell that mix, which I'm not sure how many SKUs it is. It might be 70 or something, plus a lot of the little general store type stuff. So like little snacks or drinks or small housewares. And so I think there's kind of a mix. So there's like these maybe like flagship products, and then there's like the smaller products. And choosing what we put in, it just kind of depends on like what we see the role of that product to be. So for flagship products, it has to be, number one, like super high quality. We want this to be like a handmade product. Our top priority is having products that represent some kind of like, I'll call it stewardship, but like stewardship of like a traditional way of making food or a traditional aspect of eating or cooking. Those are the products we want to represent. And I think those are associated most strongly with people. So the people who are choosing to make soy sauce by hand are people who are saying no to like potentially a higher paying career in tech or something like that, or leaving Taiwan altogether to work in the United States. And they're choosing to essentially preserve and steward these like old ways of being that I think are still very relevant. So we try to choose products that really represent those people that are choosing that, as well as like where the quality like really shines through. And then in the store, we have like all kinds of other stuff. And that's very much like, I grew up with this. This reminds me of my childhood. Like, I can't find this anywhere else. This is nostalgic. So there's sort of like a couple of different things at play. Does that answer your question? It's kind of a long answer.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Earlier, you mentioned that a big part of your business is the more invisible side. So you mentioned like distributing wholesale. I wonder how you have seen the Taiwanese American or Taiwanese diaspora. I'm not sure if it was only a US that you export to or distribute for, but how you've seen that grow, especially in like the culinary scene, I imagine, or whoever your biggest customer is from a wholesale standpoint. But we believe strongly that food is such a strong like vehicle for distributing culture. So I'm curious to see, as somebody who touches like the spider web effect of all of this food supply chain, like how have you seen that grow? And like, are there new surprising types of people or businesses that are like seeking out these products now that you wouldn't have guessed would do that before?
Yeah, I think it's definitely growing in all kinds of ways. So I think like first is just from the restaurant point of view. So we don't sell to a ton of restaurants because our products are pretty expensive. They're not like really that suited to places that are fairly sensitive to food margin, basically. So the restaurants we sell to tend to be like fine dining or very specialized restaurants. But that said, like we do keep watch, like know what's going on with the Taiwanese restaurant scene. And even within the fine dining / like more high end kind of experience dining area, we see a lot more activity and a lot more representation of Taiwanese food. And I think that it's not just like our more Taiwanese restaurants opening. I think it's also like are chefs interested in incorporating Taiwanese ingredients into their menus and experimenting with that in the way that they are also experimenting with, say, European products or like Japanese agricultural production. Like those are often like very revered, respected origins. And I think like, we see more interest in that in the Taiwanese products that have the same caliber. So one example is seeing like our black sesame oil used at like ABCV, which is like a Jean-Georges von Gerichten or whatever. I don't know how to say the name properly, but it's like part of that restaurant group, which I think is like a highly respected restaurant group. And so for us, that's very exciting. It's like, oh, cool. Like this Taiwanese product was recognized for what it is. Additionally, we have restaurants like, Winsan and Wenwen and Kato in LA and Joy in LA who are showing up as like a new generation of Taiwanese restaurants serving kind of a different audience. So we see that. Among consumers, we also see like a lot of interest in cooking Taiwanese food at home. So when I started Yunhai, we had the Kathy Erway's amazing book, The Food of Taiwan. Since Yunhai has started, like we've seen, 4 or 5 Taiwanese cookbooks be published like in very quick succession, which is, significant because those 4 or 5 plus Food of Taiwan are like the only Taiwanese cookbooks almost ever, like in English. I'm exaggerating, but like it's not like there's just like book after book after book of Taiwanese food. It's like the critical mass is starting now. And then we see, just consumer behavior. Like our audience is not Taiwanese only. It's not even Asian only. It's like a really big mix of people. So if we sell fermented black beans, like if you're going to use fermented black beans, you need to kind of know what you're doing. You definitely have to soak them. You have to understand what the flavor profile is. It's not like hot sauce. We're like, yeah, I'll put this on my breakfast sandwich or whatever. And we see like tons of people show up for those. And most of those, we don't know if they're Taiwanese or not, but most of those last names I would say are decidedly not. My last name is Smith, so I'm not saying that that means anything, but just to say that it's not like, okay, we're selling, fermented black beans to like Taiwanese people. It's like we're selling fermented black beans to people who want to cook with fermented black beans. And I think that says a lot about people's interest in the food way. Yeah.
It's always interesting to see when ingredients you don't even think are like mass known like things are being purchased by people you wouldn't expect, which is awesome.
On that note, I think like one thing that is difficult for people trying to use like, let's say Taiwanese and or Chinese diasporic ingredients is that buying those ingredients is very confusing. So if you're trying to find that in like a 99 Ranch or something, kind of difficult. Like even for me, sometimes I'm like, where are these? And like, which brand should I get? What's the difference between this and that? I've gotten better because I read more Chinese now. I'm like, oh, these are the 5-spice ones. Or like buying starches. I'm like, okay, this is labeled tapioca starch, but in Chinese it says sweet potato starch. It's like totally different.
Wait, that's hilarious. I've never
Yeah.
noticed that. I'm gonna pay attention at 99 Ranch.
Yeah, pay attention. And then like also, I was looking on like some Asian grocery stores doing research, and I was searching fermented black beans, and directions said like great in enchiladas and tacos. And I was like, oh my God, I was like, do not put this in your, I mean, probably really good in enchiladas, but if you do it right. But I was just like, this is not that kind of black bean. So there's this kind of like information scraping that's not vetted that's happening. It makes it hard to shop. So one thing Yunhai I think is doing is also just being like, okay, we're going to like give the ingredient the time of day that it deserves so that people who are looking for it can find it,
Oh my gosh. Okay. I need to dig deeper into the aisles. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really the Wild West. I mean, the English language around like, Taiwanese and Chinese diasporic, but those kinds of ingredients is pretty underdeveloped, whereas like, again, like not to keep bringing up Japanese or Korean food, but people are like, miso, like umami. These are words that have become part of the English language and people understand what they are. Like not true for like Chinese language based foods. Not as much anyway. I think it's developing though.
I agree. It's developing. I feel like there's a generational aspect to it. Like you mentioned how those 5 Taiwanese cookbooks are like probably the handful that have existed in English up till now. I do feel like it's our generation and younger that are starting to use food as a way to explore a culture that maybe you have some familiarity with because your family is of that culture, but you don't have like direct, exact exposure to it. Because, for example, cooking and using that as a method of exploring identity. For me, like whenever I tried to talk to my mom about like cooking senbeiji or like 3-cup chicken or something, right? She just like already knows the recipe, or is like, it's very just like, oh yeah, you throw some of this and some of that, or like here's a Chinese cookbook. I'm like, I'm not going to read a fully Chinese cookbook. Like there's a barrier to entry for people who grew up in the West because either you like literally can't read a full Chinese cookbook, or there's very little English language stuff to kind of walk you through the stuff that you don't know because you didn't grow up there. So I definitely can see, even from an ingredient standpoint, like you don't know what you don't know, versus my mom probably would never even read the English translation of that label of tapioca flour or whatever because she knows how to read the Chinese. So yeah, it's very interesting to see like the navigation required as somebody who is not fully like of the motherland culture yet, but trying to reach deeper into that. So I love that you guys are trying to hold our hands a little bit. And I also know that through your like the Substack and the newsletter, you also, and Instagram, you're always posting recipes too. And I think that's really important because besides the cookbook, right, I feel like there are some resources for Taiwanese recipes in English language, but not that many. What's that blog that's like super famous that they also came out with a cookbook, I think?
Is it Walks of Life?
Yeah, Walks of Life has some stuff, and then you guys post some stuff. It's like we have to do our own digging to find the recipes that we can even follow. So thank you for making recipes that people
oh my gosh,
use.
I feel like I gotta make more. I'm so behind on that. But yeah, it's true though. It's hard. There's no like, what's the word? You know how like Joy of Cooking is like the manual of like American cooking, basically. It's hard to find that in English for like Taiwanese cooking until recently, but I would say it's still developing too. It's like we're still in that like, I don't want to say like top 40 of like Taiwanese dishes, but really it's like what are the most known, I always say like charismatic megafauna, but like, the polar bears and killer whales of like Taiwanese cuisine. Like we're still in that. It's like, how do you make like 3-cup chicken senbeiji? How do you make zongzi? How do you make like all these iconic dishes? But there's another way of cooking too, which is just like cooking Taiwanese food every day, which is really different than making dishes that have names every day. And that's like a practice and a habit of mind and like an understanding of ingredients and like is also cultural. And that's like a lot harder to write a cookbook about. Like people who are doing it, they're like Googling recipes based on what's kind of in their pantry. Like that's really what that daily cooking thing is all about. It's not about like going out every day to get the perfect thing to make like Taiwanese popcorn chicken. It's project cooking. So I think there's some element of that. It's like, oh, how do we empower people to like use Taiwanese ingredients every day, cook Taiwanese food every day, and like engage in that on a daily basis without feeling like overwhelmed or like that they're doing it wrong. Recreating a dish is very different than just like using a set of techniques to cook with what you have on hand. So I think there's still like a lot of room and work to be done. And I think like for you, like that's kind of like more what I'm about. Of course, I'm always like, oh, I want to recreate the perfect like whatever grass jelly. But I'm kind of trying to leave that behind a little bit, you know, and just be like, okay, like how do we like use these ingredients all the time?
It kind of reminds me of like the idea of mom's cooking versus prestige cooking, which is like the lovely dish you see in the cookbook. And it's really funny because we often talk about how when our parents immigrate, they leave with like a snapshot of what their lives were like. And that also includes food. And I think when I think about my mom's cooking, I don't necessarily equate it with these like, I'm going to keep calling them prestige dishes, even though they're just kind of well-known dishes, right? And it's funny to me because whenever I go back to Taiwan, my aunts always tease my mom that she's like the worst cook out of all of them. They're like, like your mom's cooking's like the worst. But I'm like, this is my holy grail for like Asian food growing up, right? It's mom's cooking. So I also find that like to be very funny because everyone kind of might have their own little like flavor profile just based off of where their parents came from and like what point in time they actually immigrated.
You're also like, wait, her cooking must be the best because she made it happen in the United States without proper ingredients or like fresh noodle vendors and soy milk vendors on the street and stuff like that. Because it is very hard to adapt, actually. No, but that's definitely true. It's like home cooking. Like I always think about like, yeah, Taiwanese home cooking. And in Taiwan, I don't know. People don't cook like all that much actually because so much of it is available. I love to make my own soy milk because I feel like it's not that easy to get great soy milk. So that's like a process. I'm like, I gotta soak the beans, do this, use the right beans, blah, blah, blah. You know, then I go to Taiwan and I'm like, oh, you can just go to the wet market and get like a perfect bottle of fresh soy milk and then make tofu like that. You know, it's not that hard to make tofu if you have the soy milk. And so like what is kind of like a really intense weekly process or project cooking, almost prestige cooking, actually, like making your own soy milk and tofu. Here is like maybe more run of the mill.
Yeah, that is so funny. I never really thought about that. It's true that if we want to recreate something that is so run of the mill in Taiwan, we have to go through all these extra steps just because the ingredients are hard to find or even the equipment sometimes that you need is just like you can't find it. Or like one shop like 30 miles away sells it or something like that. So that's an interesting way to think about it and makes me feel better about whatever like attempted recipe I go after because it's harder to do it here.
It is. I mean, it's harder. It's different. And you also like one thing I've noticed about the wet markets in Taiwan, and I'm not, believe me, I'm like, I love cooking. I feel like I'm a pretty good cook. But when I'm in Taiwan, I'm still like, wait, what is this? What do you do with this? What's that seafood? Like there's so much knowledge I don't have. But like if you're in the wet market in Taiwan, you can ask the vendor. And they're like, oh, you should do this with it. Don't use it for that. But if you're in like an Asian grocery store, like 99 Ranch, that specialized knowledge from the vendor is actually not there. You're just like in the aisle. And if you need help, it's pretty hard to get help. Also because the language mix in an Asian grocery store in the United States is really wide. And the food. So like if I'm like, oh, I'm trying to make this Taiwanese thing and I'm talking to someone who maybe like immigrated from northern China or something, it's hard to connect on that specific advice or to like get the right advice or to even sometimes communicate. Just even the like knowledge at your fingertips kind of thing. In Taiwan, you just ask anyone and everyone's got an opinion on how to make zonzi or something. That's not really true here. So yeah, we are left to be like, okay, let's Google this recipe or watch this YouTube video or whatever.
You've heard me complain about how weird it is to be an American-born Mandarin speaker because I grew up speaking Mandarin at home and have a passing native accent, but simultaneously sound like a child when trying to talk about real things. Since I realized no one out there was catering to people like us and decided, I'm just going to do it myself. I teamed up with my native Taiwanese Mandarin language teacher to create Real You Mandarin, a self-paced online Mandarin course built specifically for ABCs and ABTs. All of our content is video-based, realistic dialogues centered on topics you'd actually want to talk about, from dating and pop culture to media representation and growing up as a minority in a majority society. You'll learn the relevant vocabulary in the context you actually use them and be able to practice them daily with pre-built digital flashcards. You'll also be able to practice speaking by shadowing, repeating back, or following along with all of these dialogues to practice speaking at natural speed with the right pronunciations. Check out the course at realumandarin.com and get 10% off using promo code WhereAreYouFrom10. Let us help you express the real you when you speak Mandarin. Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at WhereAreYouFromPod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyoufrom. Thanks, y'all. Well, as somebody who has now tested so many different recipes, ingredients, and you have a direct line to Taiwan through all these small batch makers of all these artisanal goods, how has your exploration gone so far? Do you feel more connected with your quote unquote Taiwanese side? And also, I imagine the Taiwanese American community, that connection, how has that grown?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel very connected. I would say that like both sides of me, so back to the where are you really from thing, like both sides of that have grown actually equally. Even though I feel like I know a lot about Taiwanese food, I'm also more often in situations where I feel outside of Taiwan while being within it. You know, we have the store, we do a lot of Taiwanese American or Taiwanese focused events at the store, and our audience is like the, I would say, most inspiring group of like not Taiwanese American creatives, but like people who moved here recently from Taiwan, like within the last decade, and are like making their career in New York City and are just, I don't know how else to say it, but I'm just like, oh wow, these like totally locally fluent Mandarin and sometimes Taiwanese speaking cool people and me. And I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Why, like, I can't even speak Taiwanese. My Mandarin's like just okay. Like, it can feel very, I would say everybody's like super nice and accepting, but like that side of me where I'm like, where am I really from comes out because I feel like I'm like, I don't know how to participate in this in an authentic way. But at the same time, like I feel very connected to those people and those friends. And like I'm doing something good for Taiwan and the Taiwanese community. And that's like, you know, gives me a sense of like contribution. And also there is some aspect of like understanding Taiwanese foodways in a more, I'm like a lifelong student, but I would say that I have an expertise there, like really specifically. So yeah, to answer that question, it's like both have grown, I think, like pretty immensely. And I don't think it will be solved just by being like a better Mandarin speaker. I think it really is like this mixed heritage, third culture situation, which I think for me, like because of that, I feel like I can tell the stories from my perspective about Taiwan really well in an engaging way. Whereas if I was just completely on the inside, I might not be able to recognize what might be engaging or special or a hook to people who are maybe not previously exposed to Taiwan.
Definitely comes across to me because when I read some of your Substack, you're introducing history or culture of Taiwan and modern culture sometimes too that people don't always know about, especially young people who grew up in the West, like that may not have access to that kind of knowledge otherwise. Either they don't have direct family that are still back in the motherland, or their parents don't talk to them about that kind of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
So I do think it's important that what you do, because English language resources for people like us who want to learn more about the culture, who want to be more plugged in, are scarce because there are so few people who are able to understand, like, yeah, this would be interesting to this American-born audience because they wouldn't know this kind of stuff and they can't read these articles, you know, they don't have that experience. So I completely vibe with this because I'm like, yep, that's constantly my issue is like, I want to know what's happening, but I can't read this like full Chinese language news site or anything like that.
I think there's just like a certain delight in showing something to someone who already knows it really well and have them really see that again for the first time. So I think about like living in the city and like people visiting and taking people around to things I've seen like forever and plus one times. And there's always like a magic to experience that through that person who's seeing it for the first time or feeling the magic of the city for the first time. And I think like the fact that there are a group of folks coming to your store and attending those events shows that they're interested, I think, in that perspective. And also I think it's just nice to have a space where you can remember fondly on things from where you're from.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think like one thing that I've heard too is that like, related to the Substack, our designer, they're called O.oo, but one of the principals goes by Pip. So Pip and I like chat a lot, and she's in Taiwan. So she sends the newsletters to her friends in Taiwan, and they like translate it to Mandarin using like an auto translate thing, ChatGPT, whatever. And then they're all like, into it, because they're like, we never knew anyone could talk about our mailbox like this, and they find value in it too. It's about both things being like novel and new, but also like ultra familiar. Yeah, like you can be super familiar with it and completely inside it and appreciate it in the same way that someone who's new to it can. Which, yeah, I mean, to me, it's like that's kind of the power of good storytelling, is to be able to like engage that wide audience. And so we try to do that when we talk about food, or, we're very like food focused. We also talk about like everyday objects and everyday culture. It's like having people see it from new eyes, but also having people see it with like eyes renewed or something, which is cool to like have both things happen. Yeah.
Speaking of people with eyes renewed, can we talk about just for a second the fact that you had Tsai Ing-Wen come to your store? How did that even happen? And what was that like to have the former president there?
So yeah, that was an amazing event, and like we'll never forget it, and was such like a high point. We've had a lot of high points, but that was like a very high point in Yunhai's history and development. And basically the way it came about was that, well, the purpose of the visit was really, like Taiwanese presidents aren't supposed to visit the United States. So the whole guise is like, oh, this is a layover on the way to visit another diplomatic partner. And because of that, the places that a Taiwanese president can visit under the radar are pretty slim. They've typically been more focused towards very recent immigrants or like Chinese speakers almost only. Anyway, so I would say this was like a pretty big departure, because Winson and Yunhai are very much general audience English language facing, even though we, of course, cater to and represent our Taiwanese community. Our audience is the general audience. And so it was kind of exciting to have the president visit a place that was actually like English language focused. The way that it came about was that, so Lillian, who I mentioned earlier, my business partner, who grew up in Taiwan, had put some significant effort towards trying to connect with the diplomatic institutions or organizations that are in the US. So basically like the Taiwanese Economic and Cultural Office, et cetera, to try to get connected. So we became connected with them, which was great, because a lot of their marketing is like pretty much in Mandarin only. And they're like really speaking to, in my opinion, like a smaller audience. Like I would never have followed Teco or something like that, just of my own volition initially. But we became kind of close with them. And so they just put us in the short list. I think like the government was like, hey, president's going to come, put a short list together of places to visit, nominated us. And there was like a few rounds of scouting, very cryptic scouting. I think Lillian got a call that was like from Teco, like, hey, can you host a delegation of 60 people next week? I think our like joke was like, oh, all of the like regional offices of Teco are going to meet up at Yunhai or something, because we didn't know what it was. What it was actually like big group of people, like a charter bus of people coming to vet the location and scout the location and select the location. So they visited a few different places, and they kept visiting, different people kept visiting. And then eventually they started, saying president in Mandarin. And we were like, I was like, okay, I know what that means, but like, this is not that secret anymore. But we had like Kim Xiao, who's now vice president, came and visited as well. So I spent time with her before the president actually came. So we had like a lot of people visit the store, and, the visit was very cool. Like it was planned to the minute, immediately veered off course. The idea was that Tsai Ing-Wen would come in, Lily and I would show her around, we'd talk about ourselves, and then we'd go have breakfast with her at Winson Bakery, which is what we did. And they kind of prepped us for it, and they made us like, practice. And I was like, oh, can it be in English? And they're like, sure. And then I think like 2 days before, they're like, oh, never mind, it can't be in English. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, this is so scary. So then I had to like do it in Mandarin, and Lillian speaks Mandarin. She did a great job. And then like I also spoke Mandarin at the time, but I always joke that like I used to go to Chinese school when I was a kid. I don't know if you guys did that, but I decided to quit Chinese school. And my mom said, one day, there will be a day that you regret this decision. And I was like, damn it. She knew there would be literally a specific day that I regretted that decision, which is the day that I had to introduce myself in Mandarin to Tsai Ing-Wen. So yeah, I always joke about that. But that was amazing. And I think like what was cool to see is just, it really like veered off course very quickly. Like we did the intros, we like talked about ourselves, we did the pineapple photo op, and then they're like, okay, we got to go. And then Tsai Ing-Wen's like looking around, picking up stuff, like taking her time. And I'm like, damn, if she had a wallet, she'd be like impulse buying stuff. I know it, but she like doesn't have a wallet. She's like staring at things. And I'm like, oh, I want to just give that to you, but that would be construed as bribery. So I'm not allowed to do that. But yeah, it was very fun. And I think that she enjoyed the visit, and we certainly did. And it was an experience.
That's amazing.
The fact that you described it as like, she's going to come to the store, we're going to introduce ourselves, and then we're just going to go get breakfast later together. I'm like, is this a Food Network show hosted by Tsai Ing-Wen?
It also like underlines this kind of like importance of food, right? Like Taiwan has I'm sure you guys feel this, but it has a very like conflicted past. And the memory of that recent history is actually a little bit different depending on who you're talking to, and can be, I think, kind of divisive. But food as like a shared cultural memory is very unifying, especially in Taiwan, where the recent history is like, just very, very tumultuous, I guess is the word. It emerged as a democracy like relatively recently. So turning to food as like a really long-standing shared cultural memory, I think is very helpful. So we definitely like experienced that where we talked about food, and I think that helps kind of like stand in for Taiwanese identity when sometimes it's a little bit harder to understand what that means. To me, it's like, this Yunghai project can feel so navel-gazy sometimes. Like I talked about like, where am I really from? I'm like, oh, I'm going to use Yunghai to figure it out. Like, this is about what being Taiwanese is for me. But then like having a visit like that, I'm like, oh, actually, no, this is really important for Taiwan, because the way Taiwanese Americans self-identify is super important to the way that Taiwan is identified in the world, because there's very few official channels for that identification. So that became very clear to me during the visit.
Oh man. Well, okay. Speaking of food being this universal thing and kind of the underlying theme of this entire episode, let's circle back to your cooking show. You have a new cooking show that is coming out or already out by the time this episode comes out. We don't know yet.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, TBD.
Let's talk about it. What is it all about? How did the idea come about, and what can people expect?
Yeah, so the cooking show covers recipes. But I would say that what I'm trying to figure out is how to translate the voice of the newsletter into like a video format. So the newsletter is kind of long form. It's not short form. It's not like Instagram. So it allows for exploration of both like an ingredient, a recipe, like cultural significance, and also honestly like my own personality, voice, or personal experience. So the show is a way to try to find a format to do that, like in video. Because I know that the newsletter can reach a lot of people, but like video is kind of like the tool of the moment, right? And I've always had trouble engaging in short form video. So trying to find a way into that. So the show's, it's called Cooking with Steam. It's actually about the Da Tong rice cooker, which is really an electric steamer. And so it explores both that kind of iconic appliance within Taiwanese households, but also the idea of steam cooking with steam being like a really common practice. And I would say in a lot of Asian cuisines, but definitely in Taiwanese, but not as common or prevalent or understood or even talked about in English, to your point. So it's just 3 episodes of pilot. We'd love to do more, but it's pretty hard to fund it on our own. And we really wanted to do it independently so that we could use it as a platform to explore the ideas we care about. So we funded it, and we also like had some friends, like a lot of people just like went so far above and beyond what we were even asking to help produce it, which is amazing. So I think our idea is like, let's release it, see what happens, and then figure out if we can get funding. Either that's like just getting sponsors, or, maybe Taiwanese companies would want to advertise, or could we crowdfund it, or could we get government funding, or could we somehow like sell it and get it on a network. So we don't know where it's going to go, but the reason we're making it is that I just really feel that we need more semi-official media that's exploring Taiwanese food. So I want to make something that's like, it has a series aspect to it that is serialized and that people will watch whether or not they're planning to cook the food, which I think is very, very different than Googling for an instructional recipe. And in that sense, that's what the newsletter does. A newsletter is like, you may never buy dried old radish, as it says on the package, but reading about it might be really interesting and has merit and allows you to consume or participate in the culture without necessarily purchasing something or even eating something. So the show kind of has that angle to it where it's really about like, yeah, exploring a topic with me, kind of like in my quote unquote home kitchen, where it's a little bit more conversational and casual and is an invitation to, yeah, maybe cook something Taiwanese one day, maybe not, but maybe just understand it a little bit better. I would say it's instructional, but that is like the secondary function. Does that make sense? So it's like at home with Lisa Cheng Smith trying to cook some stuff.
What are the 3 things you're making?
So first of all, I make niuro mian, beef noodle soup, with a datong, which is very unusual because people think of datong as a rice cooker. So I make that by way of making stewed beef shank. That's kind of a complicated episode actually, but it like kind of pairs the most iconic Taiwanese appliance with one of the most iconic dishes, and then very briefly touch on kind of the history of that dish and how it's like a relatively recent addition to the Taiwanese food icons, basically. And then I make like sort of a breakfast one, which is really steamed egg, but then I stack the datong into 3 layers. So I do steamed egg and then like a steamed Chinese broccoli and then steamed bun. So it's kind of about like, oh, you just want to make a quick, easy breakfast. You have some steamed baozi in the freezer and some vegetables, just like whip up this 3-course breakfast in 1 layer. And then the last one that I do is actually a very traditional dish. It's Taiwanese cabbage rice and pork rib soup. And that one is focused on kind of the home style food. So it's very rare to see like cabbage rice on a menu, really, like in the United States anyway. But I would say it's like extremely common in Taiwan. And so kind of exploring that vernacular, I guess.
I'm hungry now.
We actually lost power during the last episode because of a tropical storm. So we did the last episode half with power and half without. So it's going to be interesting because at some point we can't cook with the rice cooker. So we have to like improv. But that's okay because like I think, the way that we approach this show is like, and actually datong, that rice cookers like this too. It's like when you cook, it's like, just be improvisational, like don't sweat it too much and kind of roll with it and don't feel like you have to deliver this perfect quote unquote prestige dish or something like that. So yeah, so for one of the episodes, it's like I'm just like really sweaty in the dark trying to make a cabbage rice. But honestly, it came out so well, and the whole crew, there were 8 of us, we just like devoured it right after. It was definitely like an amazing result, and it was fun to like improv. We had 2 batteries and like a bunch of lights to power and cameras, and I mean it was amazing. Everybody like really pulled through and figured it out.
Well, I love that you're focusing on like home cooking, and you keep mentioning improv, right? But like it's true that a real home cook is not like necessarily reading recipes. They're just kind of like, what do I have in the fridge? Like, what do I feel like today? Let's like put it together. When I think of Taiwan and my memories of like when I spent the most time there was when I was a child and my grandma was still alive, and she was an amazing cook, and she cooked every night. Like all the aunts and uncles and cousins would come together and she'd cook for everyone every night, which was wild.
Yeah.
So she'd have like, amazing. I don't know, 10 dishes or something, and she'd just whip them up. Like she's not looking at any cookbook or anything. She would just go to the wet market every morning and say, this looks good today, and like we're gonna eat that. So for me, when I think of Taiwan and food, that is a lot of what I think about is the home cooking. So I like that you're highlighting that, because I think that is an aspect that most people can't access in the US, because unless your mom is making, very traditional home cooking Taiwanese food every day, you probably are never going to see that. So I love that. Where can people watch, and where can they tune in?
We're going to release it on YouTube. We're just going to do it on our own channel. We have very few followers now. We'd love for people to follow us. We'll announce it and write about each episode on the Substack, where we have like a significant following. So we're hoping to kind of like push the Substack audience into our YouTube channel. Yeah, the Yunhai shop on YouTube, whatever that is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is a fun conversation. And we're very much looking forward to seeing those pilot episodes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the work that you guys are doing as well. I think it's like such a amazing series and a really important topic. And it's been fun discussing it with you.
Thank you.
Okay, so people can find you on, or Yunhai on Instagram, Substack.
Yeah. We're Yunhai Shop on Instagram. Our website is yunhai.shop, which is an uncommon domain suffix or whatever, but it does exist. So yunhai.shop is an online store. You can find us in person in East Williamsburg at our store, at our Taiwanese general store, also called Yunhai Shop. And then yunhai.substack.com is a newsletter. It's kind of like a separate site and it's almost its own little entity, but I think that's, where a lot of the deepest kind of thinking, writing, and fun stuff happens. So definitely check that out. And then, the YouTube channel.
Amazing. Well, listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have questions or comments for Lisa, drop it in the comments of wherever you're currently watching or listening to this episode, and come back next week because we will have another fresh episode for you then. And until then, 再见 bitches.